I get a lot of questions from viewers, so the other day I went ahead and opened it up on my Twitter as well as in the community section of this channel, and I got so many questions from you guys. Today, I picked a handful that I wanted to go through and see if I could do my best to provide some thoughtful and thought-provoking answers to some of those questions. Xavier Spirit says, with all the remasters going on, what games do you hope are not touched? Honestly, my list used to be pretty long. Basically, anything that was 2D, I was like, no, they just couldn't be done properly until a couple of things happened. The first was Octopath Traveler. When Octopath Traveler came out, it was like a light bulb in my mind and across everybody. For the longest time, I didn't want Final Fantasy VI to get a remaster because they'd ruin it. Like, look what they did when they ported it to iPhone, right? It looked terrible. But if they did it with the style of Octopath Traveler, now that would be incredible, right? Another thing that happened is Trials of Mana. Trials of Mana was an incredible looking Super Nintendo title, but then when they remade, they not only brought us the Trials of Mana in the collection of Mana, but they remade Trials of Mana and made it incredibly fun. It just translated so well. So my list of games that I hope that they never touch really shrank. A couple of months ago, I probably would have said something even along the lines of Suikoden. I don't want Konami touching Suikoden 1 and 2. That's legitimately something I've said before. I would have much preferred that Konami sold off their intellectual properties to maybe Rabbit and Bear Studios after a successful launch of Eiyuden Chronicle or something to that effect. They are making those games, and I don't want to beat a dead horse. I've got mixed feelings on it. I've got a video talking about those mixed feelings. You can find that video in the description down below. But that list of games that I hope that they never touch are really continuing to ever shrink. And that's the other thing, is that I feel like I don't want to say don't ever touch these games at all, because I want retro games to be accessible, right? And by saying these games shall never be touched, that's effectively saying I want these games to skyrocket in value. You know, I think that the more options people have, the better. One of the main reasons that I really wouldn't have wanted Konami to remake or remaster the Suikoden games is because I would really want the involvement of the original creators, like Murayama involved. But Kawano was apparently involved in at least providing some of the new art for the new Suikoden games, so I guess I'm kind of okay with it then. If I still had one other game that I don't want people to really touch, is probably Xenogears, and for a very similar reason. I feel like the creator behind Xenogears it is his baby, right? And I really don't want Square Enix to really do much with it. And I don't think that they will. If they did decide to remake it, I would definitely want the creator involved in that as well. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. There's so many names out there to try to keep straight, but yeah, he's got his hands full already with his new series, the Xenoblade Chronicles series. So I wouldn't even see a reason to remake Xenogears. That'd be pretty neat, you know. That's like another dream scenario, is he reacquires those rights to Xenogears and Xenosaga. That would be incredible. But until he is able to be involved, I really don't want them to continue to dabble with these games. And then finally, I really feel like Lord of the Rings Volume 1 on the Super Nintendo really should only be touched by anyone as an concerted effort to try to cast it into the fires of Mount Doom. That's my answer. Don't touch Lord of the Rings Volume 1 unless it is for the purpose of throwing it into a volcano. Next up, we have a question from Nerdcrave, who says, what do you think is the best modern-ish JRPG for folks who struggle with commitment? The game that came immediately to mind with this is Live Alive. Live Alive was a Super Nintendo game that I played through, well, maybe a couple years ago at this point. I didn't end up putting a review together on that because I was going to collaborate with another person on this, but that kind of fell through for the time being. Maybe we'll come back to it. I enjoyed the heck out of my time with the original release of Live Alive, and now that there's a HD 2D remake in the style of Octopath Traveler, this is a perfect game for people who have those sorts of commitment issues where they can only dedicate X amount of hours to a specific story, or are afraid of getting lost in a large epic story, right? Live Alive is really very episodic. It is sort of an anthology of 8 different stories that are all told within like about 3 to 5 hours, depending on how much of a completionist you feel like being. And if you don't like the story that you're playing through at the time, just hang on a minute, because it's going to change in another hour or two. Live Alive is really easy to pick up and put down and to play, and I would probably not play like one episode a year for 8 years, because then you'll be very confused. I think that Live Alive is really the game made for this. Octopath Traveler, to a lesser degree. Octopath Traveler was sort of, in a way, a spiritual successor to the Super Nintendo version of Live Alive, because it also featured 8 different characters that encompasses like 8 different cinematic genres of sorts, or 8 different kinds of feels of storytelling. And Octopath Traveler, though, it does not tell one cohesive story, but it tells 8 of them kind of all in a blender. Like, you alternate between different stories and threads that you're following, but you can still finish individual episodes of each character's arcs within a few hours or so. And it's not a very easy game, so I would hesitate to throw this out there as for people who are hesitant to commit to 100-hour RPGs, because it can certainly get up there. But for people who just need to be able to like pick up and put down and stuff like that, I think those games have a structure that lends themselves well. And then you have indie RPGs, which are shorter by necessity. They generally fill in that little category of games that can be finished in, a handful of hours, a dozen, 2 dozen hours. And it's a much easier commitment, right? And they have to be that way due to various constraints, budget, time. And speaking of indies, we actually got another question here from Something Classic, who said, what are the importance of indie developers in the RPG space? And I have to say that Something Classic is an indie developer, and that's a really interesting question that they bring up, and it's one that I suspect they spend a lot of time thinking about themselves. Generally, I feel like indie RPG developers are filling in the need of being able to push the boundaries and experiment with new ideas in RPGs, ideas that AAA developers and studios just cannot pull the trigger on. They can't really mess with the genre too much because their AAA titles need to sell millions of units. So what they're going to do is stick to the tried and the true. Indies are where the bulk of real, actual creativity, I think, can occur, which is really too bad, because I also feel like indie developers are occupying the space of vulnerability, where they actually take a lot of personal risk on by going out on a limb to develop these indie RPGs that each and every release can make or break the development studio, right? So I feel like they're playing a much higher stakes game, but are really the only ones who are capable of changing the genre from the grassroots on up. And I think that that's also a big part of what they do, is creating new IPs and generally just taking chances that AAA developers and studios cannot. They're the ones who are setting trends that the AAA studios then kind of follow. Look no further than the situation with Eiyuden Chronicle and Suikoden HD remasters for a prime example of how it is the indies who are really setting the pace and other developers are just trying to keep up. Indie RPGs definitely are what are propelling the RPG genre forward in a lot of ways that AAA studios just seldom are willing to try. This one comes from Sketchman, who says, have I been into a lot of tactics games growing up? And to be totally honest, no. Tactics games are a game series or a genre rather, that I really want to explore more of. I've only actually so far finished 3 of them, and the 3 that I've played and enjoyed and finished are probably, at least 2 of them aren't what you think they are, because one of them was Shining Force, which I reviewed with Daria Plays RPGs a long time ago. Daria, come back to YouTube, please. We miss you. And then also Summon Night 6, which is like this big crossover episode of a bunch of Summon Night games, but I've not played another Summon Night game, so probably not the greatest. And then Suikoden Tactics, which honestly was pretty brilliant. A long time ago, I think the very earliest strategy RPG that I ever tried was Final Fantasy Tactics. I just didn't get very far. I think, though, that maybe the one thing that has held me back from really diving into them is that a lot of them don't have the ability to explore a world outside of combat, right? It's basically all combat and then a little bit of visual novel, and that was probably what turned me off back in the day. If I had to take a stab in the dark about what it was, that was probably it. At this point, though, I feel a lot more tactically minded. And I'm kind of curious to see if I would click a little bit more with it, you know, a more recent time through. I do want to extend more into the tactics sphere, especially because this year has really just been the year of tactical RPGs. You know, Triangle Strategy, I think, really helped. The new Fire Emblem, the upcoming Fire Emblem that they just announced, and everything in between. Just there are so many tactical and strategy RPGs coming out between the various new IPs and all the remasters that are coming out. It is shaping up to be an absolutely wild time to be a tactics fan. So keep your eyes peeled, because I think there's a good chance that I'll probably start diving into some of those myself. And then this one comes from Cole Soak, who says, any thoughts on the current state of the tabletop RPG sphere? I'm a relative newcomer. I've only been playing D&D for maybe 5 years on and off. You know, I've had a couple of troops and really enjoyed and continuing to enjoy my time with it. You know, I feel like it's kind of started maybe with Stranger Things, kind of bringing it back into the collective consciousness of people in like a cool kind of way, you know? And then of course there's Critical Role, which has really been helping push the medium further into the spotlight and made D&D a performative art and made it exciting. And that's, I think, when I started kind of getting into it was right before I discovered Critical Role. I actually was working with a coworker and I said, you seem like the kind of person who would play D&D. Have you ever played D&D before? And they said that yes, they had, and it was kind of uncanny. Turns out they also had DM'd before, and I was interested in getting together and trying out D&D because I've been playing RPGs my entire life, but I had never played the old school tabletop style RPG. That was several years ago. We played through the Curse of Strahd campaign, and I really enjoyed that. But then, unfortunately, we had to kind of bring things to a close. And only just recently did Amy and I find another group of people to start playing with locally here in Kansas now that we moved out of Seattle. I'm enjoying my time with it, and you know, I'm excited that there is a whole new big wave of people who are interested and excited in D&D. Partially because I am part of that wave of people. So I guess we'll just, continue to enjoy it. And I hope that we're not too much of a pain in the butt for everybody who, you know, liked 4th edition or whatever, Pathfinder. So anyways, that's enough for today. If you're new here and if you liked any of this, I think we'll be doing several more of these style of videos. So get subscribed, because I'm SuperDerek. I make thoughtful and thought-provoking videos for gamers who love RPGs. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Have a great rest of your day, everybody.